What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever by Stephen R Donaldson. Now, guys, this is an older book. It was published back in 1977, but it was written much earlier than that. From what I understand, this was actually turned down and denied by publishers repeatedly for years before it actually found some traction and got published. So, anyway, the reason why I want to get into it is basically because I always hear it's somewhat of a precursor for grimdark. A lot of older fantasy readers, when they hear about the current subgenre called grimdark, they always say like, "Oh man, that sounds like Thomas Covenant." So that's what made me interested in wanting to read the book. After reading it, it's definitely. After reading it, I realized that this is a much more cerebral ride than it is like an action adventure. But I am excited to get into this series now that I've cracked into book one. Let's get into it. The story is essentially a portal fantasy, but we start out in our world, and we follow our main character, Thomas Covenant, who is a leper. We find this out right away. And we're seeing kind of Thomas in town and his dealing with people from the town. So we get to kind of see right away that also the people in his community basically shun him. They don't like him, or at least they don't want to be around him. And I could kind of understand because it's probably, for their own safety is what they're thinking. But what comes across is definitely dickish. You could see why Thomas Covenant would be a bitter guy because the community just treats him like a disease, like the disease he is. So yes, like I said, you can understand why Thomas Covenant is a bitter guy, and by all means, you will notice that Thomas Covenant is a bitter guy. As we kind of work through the story, we kind of start to feel sympathy for this bitter man, though, not just because he's a leper, but because of all the stuff he's lost because of his leprosy. We start to see a little bit further into his past. We see that he had a wife and a child, and that he lost them both due to this disease. We go back a little further, and we see, though, that Thomas Covenant was a writer. He was a successful writer. Now, it doesn't really paint the picture that Thomas Covenant was a hard-working, successful writer. It really comes across more like Thomas Covenant is just a lucky guy. His first novel is a bestseller, and so he's lucky, but he is an accomplished writer. And then we see that he kind of gets left to his own devices by his family so he can kind of accomplish this next novel. And when his family comes back, his wife basically finds him in shambles. And this is really when we start to see one of Thomas Covenant's key problems. His lack, or his inability to take responsibility, especially for himself. When his wife sees him in shambles, she's like, "Thomas, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just take care of yourself?" And this is where we start to understand he finds out he has leprosy. But this doesn't negate the fact that Thomas Covenant will not take responsibility for himself. And we will see this as the story unfolds. As the story pushes forward, and Thomas finds out that he has leprosy, he'll have to talk with his doctor, and his doctor really explains to him how life-changing this is about to be for Thomas. Thomas loses some fingers on his hands, and he starts to understand that he's going to have to do some, checks of his own, himself. He's going to have to periodically check his body throughout the day just so he can really survive, just so he can keep from his body parts from falling off. These checks, these visual exams of his body will become like a routine and very integral to his survival. This will change Thomas's life for sure. Later in town, Thomas is gone. He's gone into town to pay a light bill where he's kind of find out the town is starting to pay his bills because they don't even want Thomas to come into town anymore. They want him to stay as far away as possible. And this is kind of a last straw for Thomas because he's already bitter and he's pissed off. Thomas's trip to town takes an unexpected turn when he's hit by an emergency vehicle. Well, he's waiting to be hit by the emergency vehicle. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and when he braces for impact, right before it hits him, He feels like he's all of a sudden been whisked away, and he has. He all of a sudden appears in a seems like some kind of fairy tale world. And it's even stranger because he's greeted by weird guys. What Thomas Covenant doesn't understand is that, yes, he really has been whisked away to a different world, and the weird guys in front of him are essentially the big bad guys of this land. But, instead of crushing Thomas right there on sight, they basically give him a very cryptic message and send him on his way. Which then Thomas finds a very young girl. Her name is Lena, and Lena thinks that Thomas is someone very special. She thinks that he's almost like in the incarnate of a very famous hero from this land, Beric Halfhand, because Thomas is missing fingers. So naturally, Lena just thinks that Thomas is the bee's knees, while Thomas is still struggling to figure out where exactly he is. He doesn't necessarily believe he is where he is. He remembers he was just about to get hit by an ambulance or a cop car or something, and all of a sudden he's here. So what he puts together, 2 and 2 makes 4, he must be dreaming. So Thomas knows that probably for his own good that he's just should probably work his way through this dream so he doesn't end up insane or worse. So he goes along for the ride. He follows Lena to her village, and this is really where our journey ensues. This is where Thomas Covenant will have to take that very cryptic message to some very important people, the lords of the land. And from here, they will have to decide what to do with the message, as well as what to do with Thomas Covenant. So first thing I want to really get into is, that one thing that makes most people throw this book at the wall or just give up on the series, or maybe just all around, they just never get behind the main character, Thomas Covenant. And this is maybe a little spoilery, but it also has to do with trigger warnings and stuff. And honestly, I feel like if I don't talk about this, I'm just beating around the bush and I'm just doing my viewers a disservice. So let's get into this dirt, right? So somewhat early in this journey, after Thomas Covenant has, he's met Lena, she's brought him to the village. There's a part in here where he's kind of being overwhelmed because while Thomas is in the land, he's starting to feel changes, and also while he's here, he's also really fighting himself mentally because he really thinks that this is a dream. It's the only way he can kind of come to grips with all of this. If it's not a dream, then maybe he is insane, or maybe even worse, he's dead. So his big deal is trying to make sure that he constantly remembers that he's a leper, that he's got to make sure to always check his body. That's a real thing, and he's got to make sure he checks that, right? And this dream, it can't be real, because if it is real, then I got to be insane, and that can't be. So there's all this struggle happening, which is really fun. This is a big part of this book. But the thing that everyone hates is Thomas Covenant leaves this village. He's like overstimulated, kind of having a hard time. Lena takes him to this place where he can be quiet and he can kind of meditate and be with his thoughts and just kind of chill out. And she takes him there, and then Thomas starts to have like these feelings. He starts to think of his wife, and then he starts to look at Lena, and it starts to become this thing in his head because he does think he's dreaming. He starts to think that Lena is just a part of his dream that's really making fun of him, that's picking on him, that's like twisting at his mind. So what does Thomas Covenant do? He rapes Lena. And this is not done in the most graphic way. I won't say that it's just implied, though, either. And it's just kind of also abruptly just happens. So it does take people out of the story all of a sudden. You're reading and you're like, what the hell? And like I said, some people will just not be able to get behind Thomas Covenant because of this act. I'm not trying to defend rape at all, but I do want to try to kind of convey the whole point that Thomas Covenant does think he's dreaming. And this brings up big old questions, which is one of the reasons why I liked reading this book, because it brought up, those like morality questions, like, do we have a moral obligation in our dreams? One of the things I found just beautiful about this book was the world building. Donaldson does a great job. I mean, he has built one of the most beautiful fantasy worlds that I have read. It did kind of, I know people kind of try to compare it, like, say that some of this is a bit of a Tolkien ripoff. I'll go into a little bit of that, I guess. I did get a little tiny bit of Tolkien vibes, but man, we're talking older fantasy. I feel like that is such a played out excuse for a critique. So let's just push forward. Okay, so it is an older fantasy though. So this is not the kind of fantasy that you're looking for in the action department necessarily. Like, there is some action in the book, but really this world building, this journey through the fantastical world really is a huge part of this book. So I will say this, it could be, pro or con, depending on where you lie. There is a lot of exposition in this book. There's a lot of info dumping. Like I said, though, I think that Stephen R Donaldson does an amazing job at making it such beautiful, such beautiful words that it didn't come off like cringy, or I didn't feel tired about reading about it. It just was awesome. It was just very well constructed. Kind of keeping with this is just this really... The beautiful world building really does contrast with the main character, Thomas Covenant, not just because he's a leper, but, it's also his personality. It's his lack of being able to take responsibility. And because he feels like he's in a dream, he's really not taking responsibility. But you just feel that in this because the land is a very beautiful place. In some ways, this almost feels like you're following a sinner walking around the Garden of Eden after it's been violated already once before. I'm not a very religious man, so some people might laugh a lot at that analogy or whatever, but it does kind of feel like that. But I would say that the land is not exactly Eden, or it is like Eden after it's been violated, because as beautiful as the land is, it is a place that's, it's been traumatized. It's on the mend. It's, it's recovering from some very, very bad times. Another thing I want to talk about, just kind of working off the beauty, is the magic system, or just I shouldn't say magic system, just the magic in the book. Now, like I said, this is an older tale, so the magic is just magic for magic's sake, guys. It's not this fleshed out to the 10th degree, rules from here to there, none of that, right? It's magic, but it's so beautifully done. It's just displayed. Some of the descriptions are kind of brief, but the way he words them, Stephen R Donaldson has a way with words, and boy, oh boy, I had a lot of fun, like, imagining every time the little bits of magic were used in this book. And I should also say there was kind of some neat stuff, because like I said earlier, I know there was a lot of, Tolkien, like, connections, whatever. Obviously there is a ring in this story as well. It is Thomas Covenant's wedding ring that he keeps. It is white gold, and that has a connection to this world as far as the magic is concerned. The white gold basically helps Thomas Covenant kind of like, he can cast like wild magic, which is like a magic that's not from the land. So this kind of gives Thomas this power that nobody else has. But either way, all the displays of the magic in this world, beautiful as all hell. I also want to take a little minute and talk about the characters in the book, because even though Thomas Covenant is our main character, and he definitely takes, center stage, whether you like it or not, there are quite a few characters in this book because we are on a journey. Just like the world building as you go is a big part of this book, the characters that we will meet along the way are a big part of this book as well. They will kind of help us, they'll teach us about the land, and we'll see their connection to it. A lot of people here, people in the land have taken an oath. It's like an oath of peace. And we will see how Thomas Covenant's character tests that oath in people along the way, and this plays out great. A lot of times in fantasy, these other maybe the high fantasy races can be a lot of fun because humans, boring, right? But the thing is man, they're great in this. I feel like Stephen R Donaldson did a great job with the humans characters in this book, especially like by giving certain groups different kinds of lore, so they're not all even the same. It was just really neat. It was well done. There are giants in the book. There are the lords of the land. There are plenty of characters. to keep, just kind of keeps getting more and more interesting as you go. So, all in all, it's easy to see I like the book. I mean, it's got some crazy ass concepts. It blew my mind. It made me ask questions and answer them, whether I was ready or not. And I like that. I like that in books, and I was really glad to see it in fantasy. So, yeah. As far as my 2 cents for the slow and the struggling, I was about to say to pump your brakes and beware, but honestly, Stephen R Donaldson has a way with words. A lot of this stuff just flies right off the paper. So I don't think it really poses too many problems or hurdles because of, big old words. And even those crazy concepts are pretty, well delivered, and they slap you right in the face, whether you're blind or not. So I just don't think that those hurdles are really going to be there. I think the biggest one is just the question you got to ask yourself. Do I want to read something that is heavily, it's just exposition? A lot of this is, building of this world. Just reading about the scenery and stuff like that. So that is something you want to ask yourself. I do think that this book is definitely worth your time, but it's just such a change of pace from a lot of those other fantasy tales. This is not a story where you're going on a mission to kill the dragon or get in a big old fight. Or, it's just not that. This is just such a different fantasy story. And you're going to have to ask yourself that, because it'll be easy enough for you to read. You just got to ask yourself, do I want to spend the time to read something like that? Now, as always, thanks for spending some time down here at the channel. And to Stephen R Donaldson, akadoosh. I'm going to give you 2 thumbs up, man, just because I really did have to think, and I like that. My mind was legitimately blown. This whole concept of morality with the dream and all that stuff really, really got in my head and made me think. And I'm still not sure where I lie on that whole thing. Thank you, sir, for making my head hurt, I guess. All right, guys. If you're new, please like and subscribe. It definitely helps me grow this channel. As always, boo.